Well, some of you know that when I started in vocational ministry, full-time vocational ministry, I started as a youth worker. I was a youth pastor, and I have very clear memories of my very first week at my very first church. I was working with junior and senior high students in the Rio Grande Valley in a little town called McAllen. And as church was about to begin, the very first Sunday that I was there, this older gentleman, hunched over, 3 gray strigs of hair just laid across the top, matted down with some sort of pomade he bought in the 50s. And he comes to me and he says, "Good luck. It won't make any difference." And what he meant was that in his view, what I was doing, that youth ministry, wasn't gonna make any difference. He had come to believe over the course of his long life that good families produced good kids who became good adults. And that if you just shook it out all by the averages, like it's gonna work out pretty much in that way. And he actually believed, and many people do, we just don't say it out loud, that most folks over the course of our lifetimes don't actually change that much. And I'm maybe like you, I'll be one of the first people to raise my hand, and I have got a tank full of stories to contradict that one. I think about my friend Kim, who I went to college with. She was raised in a non-Christian home. It was abusive, but she was a great volleyball player and basketball player. There were some girls on her basketball team who invited her to come to FCA, and she did, and in that place, she discovered Jesus. She went off to a Christian college. She was actually the friend of mine that encouraged me and my wife to start dating, and she's had an incredible life with a great family. But the reality is that I have been doing this for a long time, and if we're going to be honest, for every story that I have of a life changed, if I'm going to be honest, I would have to say that I have just as many stories about people who were in the fold, who claimed Jesus, and who never changed. I think about one of my early students. His name was Keith, and he was a really good kid. He was there all the time. He was active. He loved worship. He was extraordinarily likable. And those were his junior high years. When his high school years started, his parents decided that they were fine being his mom and dad, but they were not fine being each other's husband and wife. And the divorce devastated him. And he didn't know what to do or what to think about God or himself or his parents. And even though there were plenty of people who were willing to walk alongside him, the last I checked, his faith was gone. Just vanished. One of my closest friends in the world preaches for a church in Little Rock, Arkansas, and he went to a Christian college and a Christian seminary. And when you're there are a lot of people who are just like you. And they all went off and they started working in churches and in ministries and in nonprofits. And what he started to see in his middle 30s was that so many of the women and men that he had gone to school with who were committed Christians started fading away. He actually started a podcast where he would just have conversations with them about it. He called it Bonafides, because bonafide means good faith. And just asking them about what led them out of the faith. And for most people, it was something like this. An event happened or a question was raised inside of them that they didn't know what to do with. I recently heard Trevor Noah talk about his parents and the faith in their house, that they went almost overnight from not having any faith at all to being fully immersed. Like all of the music that they listened to, all of the funk and soul was out, and suddenly it was all of this Christian music, and they were sold in, like pushed all in on faith. But Trevor went to school, and he came home and began to ask his parents about things like dinosaurs, and where were dinosaurs in the Bible, And his parents just did not have answers for his questions. They were very committed, but not very deep. And I see it all the time. Several years ago, there was a string of Christian writers, public figures, musicians who decided they would leave the faith because they had questions that no one could answer. And some of the questions, honestly, weren't even all that sophisticated. And people have been asking those questions for a few centuries now. It's not like no one's ever addressed them, but they were too much for them. And so they faded away. And one of my students, Gary, was a great kid. He was a leader all through school. He loved everything. He loved people. He loved worship. He loved having fun. He loved having fun a little bit too much. And he decided that he wanted to go to a Christian college once he left high school. But his grades weren't quite high enough to get in where he wanted, and his parents' budget was even lower, which is the real issue at a Christian school. And so he packed up his bags and he left and went to a college in North Texas. And the first semester was pretty okay, but the last semester, his second semester there, things began to fall apart because he loved having fun, and he loved having fun a lot. And it was no longer hanging out with all the kids from church and the kids in his youth group. And he started drinking heavily and abusing drugs. He fell in with all the kids who went to school to party and kind of did school in their free time. And one night late, he drove his car off the road, totaled his car, almost totaled himself. A couple of weeks later, had flunked out of school and came home. He got home. His parents did what probably many of us would do in the same situation. They shipped him off to rehab. I remember visiting here in Houston in rehab. He came home and rehab didn't take. He was doing the same kind of stuff with very similar people, the same people that he discovered in college, but with different names. Stealing money from his parents until they didn't know what to do. And I've got stories like that all day long. And honestly, every now and then, I ask myself, does it make any difference? Does any of it make any difference? And if you're anything like me, have a personality like mine, a few things that you absolutely hate are when things are inefficient or unproductive. Like, I hate being inefficient and unproductive, a bunch of sideways energy that nothing's going to ever come up. And sometimes dealing with people feels inefficient and unproductive. Matter of fact, most of the time, dealing with people is inefficient and unproductive. And I know it's not just me. You don't like to waste your time. You don't like to waste your energy. You don't want people draining you. I've mentioned before, a couple of years ago for Christmas, my wife got me a journal. It's an orange journal, and across the top of it is printed, list of people who have wasted my time. None of you are on it, trust me. And I wonder, does everything just lead to entropy? Like this natural event of all things not moving to order, but to disorder? Is that just the state of things, the state of relationships and how to be? My wife, Rochelle, is very committed to our kitchen. And committed in this way, that she wants things in the kitchen in a certain place in the kitchen. So several years ago, she took a Saturday, took out all the dishes from all the cabinets, place them around, and then put them back into the cabinets where she wanted them in the kitchen. And then she rounded me and the girls up and brought us in the kitchen and walked us through every cabinet in the kitchen about where everything was supposed to go in the cabinet. And it was beautiful that one day. And she doesn't understand why she goes in the kitchen and things aren't where they are supposed to be. And I have to remind her, because people are people, and sometimes we're unloading the dishwasher or washing the dishes, and we're in a hurry, need to get out, and we just stick things where they're supposed to be. Catherine is this tall. She can't reach all the way up to the top. Sometimes the coffee mugs just get left on the counter. It's entropy. Everything is just moving toward disorder. And I wonder if people and relationships are pretty much the same way. And I don't know if any of you have seen the recently Oscar-nominated movie Zone of Interest. But Zone of Interest tells the story of Rudolf Haas. And Haas is the commandant of Auschwitz. And his family lives on the other side of the wall from Auschwitz. And there, they go about their lives. There are scenes with him having dinner parties. And Haas's mother comes to visit, and his wife shows his mom all around the outside of their house and the garden and the kids playing in the pool. And all of the time in the background, we never go into Auschwitz, but we see the blooms of smoke and we hear cries. Nothing ever happens on the other side of the wall. And at the beginning of the third act of that film, Haas gets a promotion. And there's a scene with him sitting at a long table with other German officials, and he's being promoted because he is so efficient and productive. The most efficient and productive killer of Jews. And when I saw this, I wondered, maybe being efficient and productive isn't everything that I think it is. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but people are inconvenient. There is no one that I love deeply who is not inconvenient. My children want time at all the wrong times. They want money at all the wrong times. We have to have things for dinner that I don't want to eat. I meet so many parents, soon-to-be parents about to have their first child, and I tell them, it's beautiful, it's great, you will never sleep again the same way the rest of your life. And people aren't supposed to be efficient. Relationships can't possibly be productive. Because people are people. And so this Lent, we're walking through the parables of Matthew in a series that we're calling The Kingdom. And that is because so many of the parables that Jesus tells, what he talks about, what he teaches, have to do with the kingdom. As a matter of fact, a lot of the parables of Jesus begin like this. He'll say something like, the kingdom of heaven is like. And they all have to do with people and how we see and treat people. And it's kind of a follow-up, if you were here last year, to our time that we spent in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. This is what the Sermon on the Mount actually starts to look like when Jesus begins to teach. And when Jesus begins to teach in parables, he starts in Matthew 13 with a strange parable, but it's the kind of parable that tells us about all the other parables. And this is what Matthew says when Jesus starts to teach. He says, that same day, Jesus left the house and went to sit by the sea. Large crowds gathered around him, and he got into a boat on the sea and sat there. The crowd stood on the shore waiting for his teaching. And so Jesus began to teach. On this day, he spoke in parables. Here is his first parable. Once there was a sower who scattered seeds. One day he walked in a field scattering seeds as he went. Some seeds fell beside the road, and the flock and birds came and ate all those seeds. So the sower scattered seed in the field, one with shallow soil and strewn with rocks, but the seeds grew quickly amid all the rocks, without rooting themselves in the shallow soil. Their roots got tangled up in all the stones. The sun scorched these seeds, and they died. And so the sower scattered seeds near a path. This one covered with thorny vines. The seeds fared no better there. The thorns choked them, and they died. And so finally the sower scattered his seeds in a patch of good earth. At home in the good earth, the seeds grew and grew. Eventually the seeds bore fruit, and the fruit grew ripe and was harvested. The harvest was immense, 30, 60, 100 times what was sown. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, I don't have a garden, and I've never been a farmer. But both of my grandfathers were farmers, and I spent many a hot Mississippi summer working with my grandfathers on their farm, which is how I knew I did not want to be a farmer. Because that's a lot of hard work. And I don't know everything in the world that Jesus is trying to get at in this story, and I know even less about farming, but I do know this: only the world's dumbest farmer would farm like this. To farm, you have to prepare the soil. You have to nurture the seed. I have a friend who loves his garden. And in the coming weeks and months, he will start to get pots and soil and seed. And those vegetables and fruit that he put in his garden don't start in his garden. They start on his kitchen table. And so you will walk into his house in the spring, the early spring, and it will look like a jungle is growing in there. And there will be lights. And then at one point, he will take them all out at different seasons, like when the cabbage is ready and when the tomatoes are ready. And he will put them all out. That's how you farm. It's deliberate and slow and intentional. Nobody just throws out seed unless the sower is extraordinarily generous. Unless the sower has so much seed that they don't want to miss a single spot. And Jesus comes along and says, the kingdom is like this. There is love and grace and goodness, and the sower just throws it everywhere. Everywhere. Because the sower is not willing to miss a single piece of the earth, no matter what the earth is like. And it's easy to pick up this parable in Matthew 13 and to make it about the seed and just talk about how God's word is like a seed and how we ought to nurture the seed. And that's well and good. Or to even talk about the soil, which maybe some of you have heard. And what you want to do with your life is you want to be the good soil, able to receive what God is doing in the world. That you make sure that your heart's not hard, that you're deep, that you're not shallow, that you're available to it all. But what if the kingdom is like the sower who just spreads the love and goodness? And I don't know about you, but I would bet that many of us in this room have a relationship that we are so frustrated with right now because it looks and it feels unproductive. And something happened along the way, and you have tried. You have been as kind as you think you can be and as open as you think you can be, and it's just not working. Maybe it's with an ex or with your parents, with your children. And I'll tell you the truth, about a month ago, I had an exchange with a family member, and I thought to myself, I am just done. I'm not calling, I'm not texting, you just go on with your life, until I remembered something, that in every relationship, I get to be half of it. And I get to choose how I want to be half of it. And I can choose to be the kind of person in every relationship who sows seed and leaves the growth to God, to leave the change to God. Because the growth, the transformation, the change, as much as you might want it to make a difference, is not up to you. It's out of your hands. And Jesus says, but when it does take root, it produces much fruit. So Friday night, I had the opportunity to interview this man here. His name is Jimmy Calhoun. And I have been able to do many a fun, cool thing in the time that I have been in vocational ministry that my parents have been okay with or excited about, but nothing like this. Because Jimmy Calhoun is a pastor in Austin, but that's not how he began his career. He began his career as the bass player for Parliament Funkadelic and Sly and the Family Stone. And my dad has never been that excited about anything I've ever done in my entire life. Like he was more chill about grandchildren than he has been this week. And he just peppered me with question after question after question. And I was like, Dad, I know that you're fascinated by this, but we're not gonna talk about funk music in 1977. We're just not gonna go there. And so I asked Jimmy at dinner before our event, I said, well, tell me the story about how you moved from playing bass with George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic to being a pastor in Austin. And he said, well, I hit rock bottom. He'd grown up a pastor's kid and got in trouble, was kicked out of school, went into music and did all of the things that you would expect someone to do who was in Parliament Funkadelic in the 70s. And discarded. He met a man on the streets in Southern California. And he said, you know what? There's a church down the street. There's good folks. They'll take care of you. And so he went. And the next thing that Jimmy knew, he was the janitor for the church. And one afternoon, playing basketball with one of the pastors. The pastor told him, I think you ought to become a pastor. And so they put him through school. And Jimmy has gone now from Southern California to Belize, to London, to Maryland, to Florida, and works with a community of disabled people in Austin, Texas. And you don't get there if people like you and me decide that we're only gonna focus on what we think is gonna make a difference in a relationship. But you do get there if you just commit your life and your time to sowing seed. And we let God take care of the rest. Ecclesia, let me pray for you. God, show us the people and the spaces in our relationships in our world where you are inviting us to continue sowing love and goodness and grace and hope, even when it feels like it's been rejected or denied, when it feels like we are running against rocky soil. And give us strength and endurance and perseverance to keep doing what you have invited us to do. And we ask it in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.